Hello, everyone. This is Daniel. This is going to be part 11 of my New Christian series, and we are continuing our trek through the spiritual disciplines. This one's going to be about fasting. So, this will be the final episode of our spiritual disciplines trio with prayer, Bible reading, and fasting, and I'll just briefly recap. We have talked about prayer, then about Bible reading, quite obviously, and now we are going to finish up with fasting, which is probably one of the most neglected of all of the spiritual disciplines uh, in Christians' lives. So we need to make sure that we have this down. So without further ado, let's just get started, especially since the last two videos were pretty long, and I don't want you guys to sit through a 50-minute video again. But anyway, let's get started. What is fasting? Well, like I mentioned, it's one of the spiritual disciplines. It's the last one that we're talking about. However, what fasting is, as I, by Derek Prince's influence, define it as, is this: it is abstaining from legitimately good things for spiritual purposes. The most common thing being food. And so, what I want to say about this is that fasting is something that, first of all, Christians are expected to do. This is something that not many Christians know, but this is something that Christians are expected to do. If we just jump right into the scriptures and we look at Matthew 6, verse 16, Jesus says, "Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward." So the point here is this. Notice how Jesus says, when you fast. He doesn't say if you fast, he says when you fast. It is expected that Christians will fast. Also, in Luke chapter 5, verses 33 through 35, it says, "Then they said to him, the Pharisees, why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise those of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink? And he, Jesus, said to them, Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them?" The bridegroom is referring to Jesus. Continuing, "But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days." So note, Jesus himself affirmed twice that Christians will fast. People who believe in him will fast. This is something that is expected that Christians will do. In Acts chapter 14, verses 21 through 23, we see more fasting. It says, "And when they," that's Barnabas and Paul, "had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying, We must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God. So when they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed." So we see that New Testament Christians were fasting. They understood that Jesus said that you will fast, and then the believers in Acts decided to do so. And so again, this is something that Christians are expected to do. So what are the effects of fasting, and what are the benefits of it? Why should we fast? There's a few different good reasons. First, it is a good method to humble ourselves. According to Psalm 35, verse 13, David says, "But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled myself with fasting, and my prayer would return to my own heart." So we have to remember as Christians that pride is our biggest enemy. And when we fast, this is something that humbles us. And when we are humbled through fasting, this is something that reorients our dependence on God. In my own personal life, fasting has shown me in my life just how weak and dependent I am on God because of how fragile I am as a human being, not going without food for a certain period of time. And so fasting is also a great way to reset our priorities on God. So this, whenever we fast, it gives us time to focus on God. There's no need to cook if you're going to fast. There's no need to spend time eating or to fulfill a particular desire if you're fasting from some other good thing that's not food. And so, again, fasting is so powerful for humbling ourselves. It will show you just how in need of God you are. It will also reset your priority on God. So, also, here's one thing I suggest. If you have been falling away from God and you have noticed that you are not where you would like to be spiritually, do a fast. Just do it. Literally, just do it. It will be something that I think will bless you, and it will certainly help you. Okay? It will help you get your priorities straight on what needs to be your priority. The second effect of fasting is that it strengthens prayer. So this couples with our first spiritual discipline. With fasting, it is a good way to petition God for his help. In Ezra chapter 8, verses 21 through 23, it says, "Then I, Ezra, proclaimed a fast there at the river of Ahava, that we might afflict ourselves before our God, to seek of him a right way for us, and for our little ones, and for all our substance. For I was ashamed to require of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy in the way, because we had spoken unto the king, saying, The hand of our God is upon all them for good that seek him, but his power and his wrath is against all them that forsake him. So we fasted and besought our God for this, and he was entreated of us." So the point here is that Ezra, he proclaimed a fast to petition God for their protection for their journey back to Israel after the Jews had been held in captivity in Babylon. And so the reason why he didn't want to go to the king to get a bunch of soldiers to protect them is because he boasted to the king that God will protect us. And so it would look a little weird if you say, God will protect me. By the way, can I have a few, armed guards around me to help me get through this? So he didn't want to do that. He wanted to have his mouth stand. He wanted to back up his mouth with his actions, so to speak. And we also see this principle of using fasting as a way to petition God for help in Esther chapter 4, verses 10 through 17. It says this, "Then Esther spoke to Hatak and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter that he might live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, Do you think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews? For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day." That's a fast right there. "My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Now, some background information. What was going on in Esther is that the king was tricked to ordering that the Jews in a way be exterminated. And so Esther was a secret Jewess, and so just read Esther if you want to find out. But she wanted to intervene on behalf of the Jews because she was a Jew herself, and the way that she wanted to do it was to go to the king, speak to him about the matter, and change his mind. And so, as we have read, there is a law that if you go to the king without being called, you're going to get put to death unless the king extends to you the golden scepter. And so, Esther decided to fast for 3 days, and also all the Jews that were in Shushan, so that God would intervene and help their circumstances go in their favor, and so it happened. In fact, we read this in Esther chapter 5, verses 1 through 2. It says, "Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter." So we see the resolution of that. So main point, fasting is something that can use to strengthen our prayer in the case of petitioning God for help. I personally have And also, again, this is something that humbles you. In James chapter 4, verses 6 through 7, it says, "But he gives more grace. Therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit to God." So fasting is a great way to humble yourself. It's a great way to do that. I've personally heard of a testimony of a person fasting for 7 days, and then their family got saved after they've done that because they fasted for their family to be saved. So, I don't know whether it's legitimate or not, but there's a testimony, and I thought it was quite interesting. So I just want to share that right there. Fasting. The third thing about fasting is that after it being used to humble ourselves and to strengthen prayer, is that it is correlated to worship. In Luke chapter 2, verses 36 through 37, it says this. It says, "Now there was one, Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age and had lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity. And this woman was a widow of about 84 years, who did not depart from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day." So we see that fasting is another way is in a way correlated to worship. And I think all the spiritual disciplines, prayer, Bible reading, and fasting, are all correlated to worship. Fasting is also something, fourth, that works in deliverance. In Matthew chapter 17, verses 19 through 21, we read this. It says, "Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, 'Why could we not cast it out?'" They're talking about the demon that was that they couldn't cast out of the boy. "So Jesus said to them, 'Because of your unbelief, for assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you.' However, this kind of demon or spirit does not go out except by prayer and fasting." So we see again that fasting has a role to play in self-deliverance, in delivering yourself, and also in sanctification as by extension. Finally, the fifth thing is that fasting teaches us self-denial and discipline. In Matthew 16, verses 24 through 27, it says this. "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father and with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works.'" So again, fasting I have found is a great way to learn self-denial, to say no to yourself, and a way to discipline yourself to keep on a certain path. And so Jesus said, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself. This is something that you will have to do in your Christian life. And so fasting is a great way to get you in that and to get you essentially practicing that. And it just helps. There's just so many benefits to it. I bet those are the five things that I mentioned there. Again, humbling ourselves, that's a benefit. Strengthened prayer, helps in worship, works in deliverance, and it teaches self-denial and discipline. I don't think this is everything that fasting has to offer, but it's certainly some of the things. The next thing I want to talk about is about advice on fasting. So if you're thinking about fasting, here is my advice to you. The first thing we need to realize about fasting is that when we do it, we need to be intentional and serious about living up to the Christian faith before we do it. In Isaiah chapter 58, verses 3 through 7, it says this. "Why have we fasted," they say, "and you have not seen?" So that's talking to God. "Why have we afflicted our souls, and you, God, take no notice? In fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exploit all your labor." So now God is speaking to them. To this, he's responding to this objection. "Indeed, you fast for strife and debate, and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You will not fast as you do this day, to make your voice heard on high. It is a fast that I have chosen, a man for a day to afflict his soul. Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush, and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast, an acceptable day to the Lord? Is this not the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out, when you see the naked, that you cover him and not hide yourself from your own flesh? So the point that God is making here is that people were fasting, but they were seeing that they were not getting God to respond, and so God pointed out that your fasts are nothing to me because you do so many evil things on that day and you're not even living the right way. And so that shows us that before fasting, we need to make sure that we are intentional and serious about living up to the Christian life. Okay? So that's the first thing we need to do. To fast without fulfilling the basic Christian convictions makes fasting nothing more than an empty religious exercise. So take it how you will. However, there's also different types of fast, and I'm going to go through each of these. The first one is a repentance fast, and this is something that I have in a way made up, but I think it's biblical. This is fasting. This is a type of fasting that can also be a way to express repentance and can realign you with God's purposes, so that if you've been straying and you are distraught about your recent behavior, allow the grief to come through a fast. I remember that whenever I was a newly born again Christian, I was so upset about the way that I was living that I actually in a way, I lost my appetite to eat, but still ate dinner and the stuff that my parents gave to me in order not to raise suspicions about myself. But if I would have been alone at that time, I think I would have quit eating for a good while, just mourning over the way that I've been living. And so the point that I want to make is this that one way to fast is if you have noticed that you've gone astray and you're like, I want to realign myself with the Lord, and then you go ahead and you fast and just express your grief to the Lord and ask him for his help and forgiveness. And we actually see Paul do this in Acts chapter 9 verses 7 through 9. It says this. It says, and the men who journeyed with him, Paul, stood speechless, hearing a voice but seeing no one. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one. But they led him by hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. So that, again, that was Saul, who would be Paul, who would write the New Testament, who would write a good portion of the New Testament. So after he was converted, he didn't even eat or drink for 3 days because I think he was just mourning over his sin, the fact that he was persecuting Jesus Christ's church, and then Jesus meets him on the road and Paul realizes who Jesus actually is. The next kind of fast is something which is the most regular one, or at least the one that's most correlated with the word fasting. It's called a food fast. And so very basically, this is abstaining from food. And this is what most people think about whenever someone says, I'm fasting. If you've never done this before and you want to do it, I suggest first seeing if you can medically do this to make sure that you're not going to medically harm yourself by doing this. And if you are a young Christian and you want to do this, make sure that you can get parental approval. If it's going to be obvious that you are going to be fasting. So in the case that, for example, you always have dinner with the family and they would be worried about you not eating, then let them know if that you're going to be doing it. And if they say no, I think you should judge it, but I would still remind you to remember to honor your father and mother because ultimately they do care about you. Not all the time. I understand that some people have difficult circumstances, but honor your father and mother and honor their decision and fast whenever you have the liberty to do so. All right. That's what I would say for now. Again, I think that you can also judge. I think you have to judge the situation on a case by case basis with this because, for example, if you live with a family that just doesn't care and you rarely ever eat food together and they won't notice or care if you fast, then go ahead. But also make sure that you're not hurting yourself by doing so. All right. Now, with regards to the specifics, there's two ways to, I guess, measure this kind of a fast. It is one by skipping meals or by having a time frame consideration. What I mean by that is that, for example, you can do a small fast where you skip one meal, right? You just skip one meal in the day, or you say, I'm going to fast for literally 12 hours, and you just measure the time from the time you start to the time you end. This also goes on for 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, one meal, two meals, three meals, four meals, as many as you can possibly imagine. before, and hopefully, don't kill yourself doing this, obviously, right? So make sure you're reasonable about this. If you've never done this before, start small. Start with the one meal, start with the 12 hours, okay? Then move your way up. Now, what about a water fast? Now, you see, there's a distinction here. A water fast is whenever you abstain from, or a food and water fast, that's also another way to say it. This is a fast when you abstain from food and water. And what I want to say about this is that unless you feel a special leading to abstain from water, go ahead, but also be aware of the health implications. You don't want to dehydrate yourself to death. Don't make dumb decisions, okay? For you young Christians who are like teenagers out there, I would actually go so far as to actually discourage you from doing this because you're young Christians and you're young in the faith. However, if you do have proper oversight, proper spiritual oversight, if you have a pastor that watches over you very well, or Christian parents that watch you over very well, and you have their support and they're watching over you, then I would say go ahead and do it. But if you're doing this alone, don't do it. Not until you're older and more mature, because you might seriously hurt yourself doing this if you're not smart. And typically young people don't tend to be very smart. So nothing personal, but just don't do it until you're older, I would say. The last type of fast is this. It's called a Daniel fast. And no, this is not named after me. This is actually named after the prophet Daniel. But what a Daniel fast is abstaining from pleasurable foods, or anything else that is legitimately good for a while or a season. So this is very different from the water fast that I just talked about. This is very different from the food fast. This is very different from the repentance fast. So this Daniel fast, again, this is whenever you stop pleasing yourself with foods that you'd like to eat, and you just eat the basic foods. Or it doesn't even have to be about food. It can literally be about anything. Entertainment is a big one these days, because with entertainment, it's something that really takes a huge chunk up of our time. And in fact, if I think about it, back in the day, the way that people would please themselves and be entertained is actually by the food. Food was a very big entertainer back in the day. There weren't many other ways to entertain yourself, but food and wine were a big way to get to be entertained. And so abstaining from those means that you abstain from entertainments and you really focus on the priorities. And so if you want to do a Daniel fast, which gets its inspiration from Daniel 10 verses 1 through 3, let's quickly read that. Let's see how this happened. It says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long. And he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. In those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, nor meat, or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. So he only essentially ate vegetables. And grains, I would think. He said he ate no pleasant food. He didn't eat meat or wine. So he did a Daniel fast. That's why it's called a Daniel fast. And so how this looks like for you today would be for you to abstain from pleasurable food. So abstaining from desserts, eating basic things. It doesn't even have to be just something that is for food. From anything you think you need a break from so you can realign yourself spiritually. This could be YouTube, this could be the electronics, this could be social media, this could be video games, entertainment of any kind that you can think of. With regards to also the difference between a Daniel fast and a food fast, I think it's quite obvious, but a Daniel fast is not as intense as a food fast. So the trade-off that is going to be made here is that a Daniel fast is something that is going to automatically be something that lasts longer periods of time than a food fast. So for example, a person may fast for like 3 days, food-wise, but a Daniel fast may be 3 weeks, as in the case of what we just read. So it depends, right? If you're a young kid and you want to fast, I really actually suggest starting with the Daniel fast, and because actually I think Daniel fasts sometimes may require more self-control than a regular fast, because a regular fast can be over quickly. You say, okay, all I need to do is just get through this day and I'll be good. But a Daniel fast, you have to actually endure for days on end, and there's no quick break from it. So So Daniel fasts, they're legitimate. I think they're good as well. I think they're very helpful. I don't have much more to say on fasting, which I was hoping that this was going to be a much shorter video because of how long the other videos went on the spiritual disciplines. But anyway, I have some additional resources for you. You can look at Derek Prince's resources on fasting. They will be included in the description below. They will be it will be when you fast and how to fast successfully. So I think that if you're interested in fasting, you can take a look at those and get the advice that Derek Prince has to offer. And so my conclusion about fasting is that fasting is a very helpful and I think necessary tool in our Christian lives if we sincerely seek to grow. And fasting as a practice intertwines with worship, prayer, and seeking God and the Lord, and a lot of other topics that we have discussed in the past. Fasting is very helpful. It is really a boost to the spirit. It really is. And so let us use this God-given method of spiritually benefiting ourselves. Let's not neglect it. I understand in certain circumstances a person just cannot do this because of age, medical restrictions. That's perfectly fine. But I think that in that case, a person needs to make sure that they compensate with prayer and Bible reading if they don't do that. And I also understand that it's difficult to keep up the standards sometimes where you're like, well, I don't want to fast and I'm so busy with all this different stuff. Well, whenever you get into a season where you're not as busy, make sure you take that time to undergo some of these spiritual disciplines that we've been talking about: prayer, Bible reading, and fasting. So that will be everything for this video. See, I gave you a treat with a short video. Well, if you really like my videos, then this will be actually a punishment. But anyway, thank you for watching. Hope it was helpful, and I hope that you will find many benefits through fasting. So anyway, be blessed in Jesus' name, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.